My name is Thomas Miller, and if you passed me on the street today, you'd see nothing more than a man with worn-out shoes, a scruffy beard, and tired eyes. You might assume I've always been this way, just another homeless face in a city that has too many of them. But I wasn't always like this. Once I was a husband, a father, a homeowner, and a man with roots that ran deep. Then a flood came and everything I had built, everything I had loved, was washed away in a single night. And when I turned to my family for help, the people I thought would never abandon me closed their doors. That was how I became what you see now. I grew up in a small town in Missouri, right along the banks of the Mississippi River. The river was both a blessing and a curse. It fed the soil that grew our crops, gave us fishing in the summers, and painted sunsets so beautiful they looked like they belonged on postcards. But it also carried danger. My father used to say, "The river gives and the river takes." I didn't fully understand his words back then. I do now. My parents raised me with simple values. Work hard, take care of your own, and never forget where you came from. Dad drove trucks for a living, and Mom worked part-time at the diner downtown. We didn't have much money, but we had love, and that was enough. I was the kind of boy who loved being outside, helping Dad fix the old pickup, or running barefoot through the fields after a summer rain. As I grew older, I stayed close to that river. I worked odd jobs, construction, farming, anything that kept me near home. Eventually, I met Linda. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. We met at a county fair, her laugh carrying over the music and the chatter. I asked her to dance, and that was it. From that moment on, I knew she was the one. Linda and I married young in the church where my parents had exchanged vows. We didn't have much, but together we bought a small house near the river, the kind of place we could raise a family in. It wasn't perfect, the roof leaked and the paint peeled, but it was ours. We poured ourselves into that house, fixing it one paycheck at a time, turning it into a home filled with laughter and warmth. Soon came our children, first Matthew, then Anna. They filled the house with case and joy, their toys scattered across the floors, their voices echoing through the halls. I worked long hours to provide, but every tired step home was worth it when I opened the door and heard them shout, "Daddy!" Linda would meet me with a tired but genuine smile, and for a moment everything felt right in the world. We lived simply but happily. Sundays were family days. We'd go fishing by the river, pack sandwiches, and watch the kids chase frogs along the muddy banks. In the evenings, Linda and I would sit on the porch with sweet tea, watching fireflies light up the summer sky while Matthew and Anna played tag in the yard. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love. Every corner held a memory. The kitchen smelled of Linda's pies, the living room walls bore the crayon marks Anna once scribbled, and the old oak tree in the backyard held a swing Matthew insisted was his airplane. I believed those days would last forever. I believed our home was indestructible, that nothing could take it away from us. But life has a way of proving us wrong. Looking back now, I see the signs. The rains had been heavier that year. The river had swollen before, but this time it was different. The water crept higher and higher, licking at the edges of the levees, threatening to spill over. I heard neighbors whispering about evacuation, but I told myself it would pass like all the others. The river had risen before, and we had always endured. Why would this time be any different? I was wrong. When the flood came, it didn't just take my house. It took the life I had built, the future I had imagined, and the family I thought would always stand by me. But that part of the story comes later. For now, what I want you to know is that I was not always the man sitting on this sidewalk. I was Thomas Miller, husband, father, provider, and proud homeowner by the river. And it was the river that would teach me how quickly all of that can be taken away. Life by the river had a rhythm to it, a steady pulse that shaped every season of our lives. The mornings began with mist rising off the water, drifting across our fields like a veil. Birds called from the trees, and the air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers. To an outsider, it might have looked like an ordinary rural life, but to me, it was paradise. Our little house sat on a patch of land not far from the levee. You could hear the river's hum at night, a low, constant murmur that became as familiar as breathing. Linda used to say it sounded like a lullaby, one that cradled us to sleep. I believed her. When I stood on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the water gold, I felt a peace I thought would never break. Raising children there gave those days even more meaning. Matthew was adventurous, always daring to climb trees higher than I told him to, always running toward the water's edge with a stick in hand, pretending to be an explorer. Anna, younger but full of fire, insisted she could do everything her brother did. If Matthew built a fort out of sticks, she was right there beside him, hammering nails into scraps of wood with all the determination her small hands could muster. I loved watching them grow in that setting. The riverbanks became their playground, the fields their stage. They chased frogs, collected rocks, and skipped stones across the water, their laughter carrying in the breeze. Linda and I often sat on the porch, sipping sweet tea and smiling at their antics, grateful for the gift of such simple happiness. The house itself was humble, but it held the weight of our lives. The living room smelled of old wood and coffee. The kitchen was the heart of our home. Linda baking pies that filled the air with cinnamon and sugar, me sneaking bites of crust before she scolded me playfully. Every holiday was celebrated there, with neighbors crowding in, kids running wild, and the warmth of community filling every corner. Sundays were special. After church, we'd come home for big family dinners. Sometimes we invited relatives, sometimes just the four of us, but always with a table full of food and laughter. Linda had a way of turning even the simplest meal into a feast. I remember one Sunday when the power went out and she cooked everything on the grill outside. Potatoes, chicken, even biscuits. The kids thought it was the greatest adventure, eating by candlelight as the storm raged outside. Those days felt unshakable, like we had built something solid. I worked long shifts in construction, sometimes gone before sunrise and back after dark, but each time I returned to our little house, the weight lifted. The sight of Matthew running out with his toy hammer, shouting, "I'm gonna help you, Dad," or Anna holding up a picture she'd drawn of our family. It made every blister, every ache worth it. Linda was the glue that held us together. She balanced my long hours with tenderness, teaching the kids patience and kindness, filling the house with songs from her old radio. Sometimes I'd come home to find her humming in the kitchen, the kids dancing around her feet, the smell of fresh bread in the oven. I thought to myself, this is heaven. This is all I'll ever need. But the river always lingered in the background, a reminder of its power. We'd seen floods before, though never severe enough to threaten us. Still, every spring when the rains came heavy, I'd check the water levels, pacing along the levee, watching the currents churn faster. Linda would place a hand on my arm and say, "It'll be fine, Thomas. The river has always risen, and it's always gone back down." I wanted to believe her. I needed to. Neighbors talk sometimes about moving further inland, away from the water's reach. But to me, the river was part of who we were. My father had raised me near its banks, his father before him. It was our livelihood, our history. Leaving it felt like betraying something sacred. I told Linda we were safe, that we'd always be safe. Looking back now, I realize I mistook comfort for security. The river lulled us into believing we were untouchable, even as it swelled higher with it each passing year. I told myself the levees would hold, that nature would show mercy, that we'd be spared like we always had before. I was wrong. But before the storm came, before the night the waters rose and swallowed everything, we lived. We laughed. We built memories that even the flood could not wash away. And in those moments, watching Matthew swing from the old oak tree, hearing Anna's giggles as Linda chased her through the yard, sitting side by side with the woman I loved as fireflies blinked in the dusk, I believed we had forever. I had no way of knowing that forever was about to end. The year the flood came started like any other. Spring brought its usual heavy rains, soaking the soil and swelling the river. At first, it didn't seem unusual. The Mississippi had always risen this time of year. It was part of life by the water, just another reminder of my father's words. The river gives and the river takes. But as the weeks went on, I noticed something different. The rains didn't stop. Day after day, gray skies poured down, turning the roads into streams and the fields into swamps. The river grew restless, its surface rising inch by inch, its current faster, angrier. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just another season, that we'd seen this before. But in my gut, a gnawing unease began to grow. One evening, I walked along the levee, boots sinking into the mud, and felt the ground tremble under the rushing water. I had never seen it so high, so close to spilling over. The sight made my chest tighten. I hurried home, dripping wet, where Linda was folding laundry by the fire. "It's bad, isn't it?" she asked softly, reading the fear in my face. I wanted to protect her from the truth, but I couldn't. The river's higher than I've ever seen. If this rain doesn't let up, we could be in trouble. Her hands stilled on the laundry. For a moment, silence hung between us, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Then she nodded and said, "We'll be ready, whatever comes." That was Linda, steady, strong. She always had faith, even when mine faltered. Over the next few days, the town buzzed with rumors and warnings. Neighbors gathered sandbags, stacking them along the riverbanks. The local news flashed updates every hour, urging people to prepare for possible evacuations. I joined the others, hauling sandbags until my back screamed, sweat mixing with rain as we built walls against the water. But with every bag we laid, the river seemed to rise higher, mocking our efforts. At home, the children sensed the tension. Matthew asked why we couldn't play outside anymore, why Daddy was always down by the river. Anna clung to Linda's skirt, frightened by the thunder that shook the windows at night. We tried to comfort them, tried to keep the fear from showing in our voices. "It's just rain," I told them. "The river's always been there, and we've always been fine." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. One afternoon, I came home to find Linda packing a bag with clothes and important papers. "Just in case," she said, her voice calm, but her hands trembling slightly. I hated the sight of it. Packing meant admitting the possibility that we might lose everything. Still, I didn't stop her. Deep down, I knew she was right. That night, the storm unleashed its fury. Wind howled through the trees, bending branches until they cracked. Rain hammered the roof like stones, seeping through the patched shingles and dripping into buckets. We scrambled to place around the house. The power flickered, then died, plunging us into darkness. The only light came from our lanterns, their glow casting long, quivering shadows on the walls. The kids huddled close, eyes wide. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told them stories, anything to distract them from the storm's roar. But each crash of thunder rattled my own nerves. Each gust of wind felt like a warning. Around midnight, I stepped onto the porch and froze. The yard was already a shallow lake, water glistening under flashes of lightning. The river had breached parts of the levee, and the current surged closer with terrifying speed. I ran back inside, heart pounding. "We need to be ready to leave," I told Linda. She nodded, already bundling the children into coats and boots. We moved quickly, grabbing what little we could, important papers, some food, the kids' favorite toys. I told myself we'd be back in a few days, that this was just precaution. But part of me knew we were leaving more than just a house behind. The storm didn't let up. The rain fell harder, the wind howled louder, and the river kept rising. By dawn, the water was at our doorstep. The flood had begun, and though I tried to stay calm for my family, inside I felt the truth settling like a stone. Nothing would ever be the same again. The night the flood truly came is etched into my memory, like scars on the skin, raw, permanent, impossible to erase. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear the roar of the water and feel the ground shudder under its weight. We had gone to bed uneasy, the rain hammering against the windows, the roof groaning under the relentless storm. The children were restless, their small bodies twitching with every crash of thunder. Linda and I tried to calm them, promising it would all be over by morning. But deep down, we both knew morning might never come the way we hoped. Around 2 a.m., I jolted awake to a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't thunder or wind. It was the low, guttural roar of water forcing its way where it didn't belong. I swung my legs out of bed, feet hitting cold, wet floorboards. My heart lurched. The water was already inside. "Linda!" I shouted, shaking her awake. She gasped as her feet splashed into the rising water. Panic filled her eyes, but she didn't waste a second. She bolted to the kids' room while I fumbled for the lantern. The hallway was a river. Water surged past my ankles, rising fast, carrying toys and shoes like tiny boats. I stumbled into the children's room where Linda was lifting Anna out of bed. Matthew was already awake, clinging to his blanket, tears streaming down his face. "We have to go, now," I barked, louder than I intended, fear sharpening my voice. With one child in each of our arms, we pushed back down the hallway. The water was at our knees now, icy and merciless. The lantern flickered, its dim light casting frantic shadows on the walls. By the time we reached the front door, it was almost impossible to push open. The current outside pressed against it with terrifying force. I braced my shoulder and shoved with everything I had. With a violent crack, the door gave way, and a torrent of water surged inside, nearly knocking us off our feet. The yard was gone. Where grass and dirt had been was now a raging river, black under the storm clouds, littered with debris. The old oak tree in the backyard groaned, its roots loosening as water tore at the soil. I lifted Matthew higher, gripping him tightly as he clung to my neck. His cries were drowned by the storm. "Hold on to me, buddy," I whispered, though my own voice trembled. Linda clutched Anna with both arms, her face pale but determined. We fought our way through the current, each step a battle. Branches, trash, even pieces of roofs floated past us, slamming into our legs. The cold stole the breath from my lungs. My muscles screamed, but adrenaline kept me moving. "Head for the high ground," I shouted over the roar, nodding toward the hill beyond the road. It wasn't far, but in that moment it felt like miles away. The water rose faster than we could move. By the time we reached the road, it was waist-deep, swirling and angry. Cars bobbed like toys, their alarms wailing before being silenced by the flood. Houses around us groaned and shuddered, their foundations failing. I watched in horror as one collapsed entirely, the roof vanishing beneath the water. Linda stumbled, nearly losing her grip on Anna. I lunged, grabbing her arm, pulling them both upright. "Don't let go," I begged, as much to myself as to her. She nodded, clutching our daughter tighter. We pressed on, step after agonizing step, until the hill was just ahead. The ground sloped upward, promising safety. But the river had other plans. With a roar, a surge of water came barreling down, stronger than anything we had faced yet. It hit us like a wall. I staggered, Matthew screaming in my arms. The current ripped at my legs, dragging me sideways. I fought with everything I had, teeth clenched, muscles burning. Beside me, Linda screamed, clutching Anna as the surge pushed us apart. "Thomas!" she cried, her hand reaching for mine. I reached back, fingertips brushing hers. Then the current tore us apart. I spun, the world a blur of water and darkness. I screamed her name, screamed the children's names, but the flood swallowed my voice. The lantern slipped from my grasp and vanished into the depths, leaving only the flashes of lightning to guide me. I don't remember how long I fought. Minutes, hours, time meant nothing. Somehow I made it to the hill, crawling onto the muddy slope with my arms shaking, lungs burning. I collapsed, gasping, water pouring from my mouth and nose. But when I looked around, they weren't there. The hill was empty. The night was silent except for the roar of the flood. My arms, once holding Matthew, were empty. My hands, once reaching for Linda's, clutched only mud. I screamed until my throat tore. I searched the water, the trees, the night sky itself, begging for a sign. But all I saw was destruction. All I heard was the endless rush of the river reclaiming everything. That was the night I lost my home. That was the night the river took more than wood and stone. It took my family, and it left me alone. By the time the sun rose, the world I knew was gone. The storm had finally eased, but in its place was devastation. The river no longer murmured like a lullaby. It roared like a monster that had swallowed everything in its path. I stumbled along the muddy slope of the hill, where I had collapsed hours earlier. My legs were weak, my body numb, but my mind screamed one thought over and over. Find them. Linda, Matthew, Anna, they had to be out there somewhere, clinging to a tree, waiting for me to come. I couldn't accept any other possibility. I waded back into the floodwaters, chest deep now but slower than the raging torrent from the night. Branches and furniture floated past me. Pieces of houses, roof shingles, window frames, even entire doors, bobbed along like broken toys. Every time I saw a shape, my heart leapt, praying it would be one of them. Every time, it was only debris. I shouted their names until my voice cracked, until my throat burned raw. Linda, Matthew, Anna! The echoes came back to me empty. No answers, no cries, just the endless rush of water. Hours passed, though they felt like years. Rescue boats appeared in the distance, their motors buzzing, men with megaphones calling for survivors. They pulled me out of the water when my body could no longer fight, wrapping me in a blanket I didn't feel. They asked me questions, my name, where I lived, how many were in my family. I tried to answer, but the words broke in my mouth. My wife, my kids, please, you have to find them. They searched. God, how they searched. Boats scoured the river, volunteers lined the banks, helicopters circled overhead. But as the hours stretched into days, the hope that had once burned in me flickered, then dimmed. When they found them, it wasn't the way I prayed for. 3 days later, a rescue worker approached me at the shelter where I had been staying. His face was pale, his eyes heavy. He didn't have to say it. I saw the truth before the words left his lips. They had found Linda and the children downstream, together. Still, I don't remember much of what happened after that. I know I collapsed. I know I screamed. I know the world turned black around me. When I came to, I was lying on a cot in the corner of the shelter, surrounded by strangers' pitying eyes. Losing my home had seemed impossible. Losing my family was unthinkable. But now both were true. The flood had taken the house Linda and I had poured our lives into, the walls that once echoed with our children's laughter, the kitchen that smelled of her pies. It had taken the swing Matthew loved, the crayon drawings Anna had scribbled on the walls, the porch where Linda and I had dreamed of the future. And now it had taken them too. The shelter buzzed with people, families clutching one another, neighbors sharing food, volunteers handing out blankets. But I sat alone. My hands were empty. My arms ached with the phantom weight of my children. My chest burned with the memory of Linda's hand slipping from mine in the current. They told me I was lucky to survive. Lucky. The word cut like a knife. How could I be lucky when everything I loved was gone? Survival didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a punishment. When I was finally able to walk back to the place where our house had stood, the sight stole the breath from me. Nothing remained. The house was gone, swept away entirely. Only the cracked foundation jutted out from the mud, a skeleton of what once was. Furniture, clothes, family photos, all of it was lost to the river. I dropped to my knees, pressing my palms into the wet earth, as if I could somehow hold on to the memory of what once stood there. Neighbors passed by, some offering condolences, others avoiding my gaze. They had lost too, but they still had one another. Their families gathered close, their arms linked, their children clinging tight. I had no one left to cling to. In that moment, staring at the empty lot where my home had been, I realized the truth. The flood hadn't just taken wood and stone. It had taken the life I built, the future I dreamed, the very core of who I was. I walked away from that place with nothing but the clothes on my back and the crushing weight of grief. Losing my home meant losing more than walls and a roof. It meant losing the anchor that held me steady, the place where my family's love lived. And without that anchor, I was adrift, tossed out into a world that no longer felt like mine. The flood had taken everything, and I had no idea how to begin again. In the days after the flood, I drifted like a man without a compass. My home was gone, my family buried by the river, and the town that once felt so familiar now looked like a war zone. Trees uprooted, cars overturned, houses reduced to piles of timber and mud. Every corner of that place held memories, and every memory now carried pain. The shelter the Red Cross had set up was packed with people, families huddled together on cots, children crying, mothers trying to soothe them with whispered promises. Volunteers moved through the room, handing out soup, blankets, and bottled water. It was chaos wrapped in kindness. But for me, it felt unbearable. I sat alone, watching others cling to each other, and realized I had no one left to cling to. When they handed me a bowl of soup, I couldn't even lift the spoon. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but grief was heavier. One of the volunteers, a woman with kind eyes, placed a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "You're not alone." But she was wrong. I was. I stayed there for a few nights, though I barely slept. The noises of dozens of people breathing, crying, and moving around kept me awake. But even more than that, it was the silence in my own heart that haunted me. I kept expecting to hear Linda's voice, to feel Matthew climb into my lap, to hear Anna's giggle. The absence was louder than any storm. Eventually, I couldn't stand the shelter anymore. I needed air. I needed distance. I told the volunteers I was leaving, and though they tried to convince me to stay, I walked out into the wreckage of my town. I had nowhere to go. My house was gone, and with it every belonging I had ever owned. Friends and neighbors had their own families to worry about. I didn't want to be another burden. My parents were gone, taken by illness years before, and my siblings had scattered across states, building lives of their own. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone in my extended family would take me in. So I tried. I knocked on the door of a cousin who lived a few towns over. He opened it, surprise flashing across his face at the sight of me. I explained what had happened, my voice breaking as I asked if I could stay for a while. His eyes softened, but behind him I saw his wife frown. He said they didn't have space, that things were tight, that he was sorry. The door closed and I stood staring at it, hearing the lock click into place. I tried another relative, then another. Each time the answer was the same. Polite words, sad eyes, but no place for me. "We wish we could help, Thomas, but we just can't." Those rejections cut deeper than the flood itself. Water had taken my house, but blood, my own family, took away the last shred of belonging I had. I ended up in a cheap motel for a week, paying with what little cash I had left. The room smelled of mildew, the mattress sagged, but it was a roof. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The roar of the flood, Linda's hand slipping from mine, the emptiness of my arms where my children should have been. I cried until I had no tears left. When the money ran out, I left the motel and wandered. I slept in bus stations, on church steps, under bridges. Some nights I begged for change just to buy a sandwich or a cup of coffee. Other nights I went without. Seeking shelter became a daily struggle. One church opened its doors to me for a few weeks, offering me meals and a cot in the basement. The pastor told me I was welcome there as long as I needed. I wanted to believe him, but shame burned inside me. I wasn't the man I used to be. I had been a provider, a protector, a father. Now I was just a man taking handouts, drifting like a shadow. Eventually I moved on again. I don't even know why. Maybe because staying too long in one place made me feel like a ghost haunting lives that still had meaning. Everywhere I went, I searched for a piece of what I had lost. A smell, a sound, a flicker of memory that could remind me I had once belonged somewhere. But all I found were closed doors and empty nights. The flood had taken my home in one violent rush, but the search for shelter after took me apart slowly, piece by piece. Each rejection, each locked door, each cold night under the stars chipped away at me until there was nothing left but survival. And as much as I longed for someone to take me back, the truth became painfully clear. I had nowhere to return to. I was a man without a home, without a family, without a place in the world. Seeking shelter wasn't just about finding a roof anymore. It was about trying and failing to find a reason to keep going. I used to believe family was unbreakable. Blood was thicker than water. That's what my father always said. He told me no matter what happened, family would always be there. But standing in the rain on strangers' porches, listening to my own kin say, "I'm sorry, but we can't help you," I learned the cold truth. Sometimes even family turns you away. The first rejection stung like a slap. My cousin Mark looked genuinely pained when he told me his house was too small, his kids too young, his wife too worried about money. He pressed a few bills into my hand, insisting it was the best he could do. I walked away holding the money but feeling emptier than before. The second rejection was harsher. My Aunt Jean barely opened the door before she said, "Thomas, you can't stay here. We've got our own problems." She spoke quickly, almost guiltily, as though if she kept the conversation short enough, she wouldn't have to face the shame in my eyes. By the third, I stopped expecting kindness. I knocked on my brother's door, my own brother, and he stood there, jaw tight, refusing to meet my gaze. "We just can't take this on, Tom," he said. "I've got my own family to think about." His words cut deeper than any floodwaters. I wanted to shout, "I'm your family too. I lost everything." But I didn't. I just nodded, turned away, and walked down the steps with lead in my chest. That was the cold truth. I no longer had a family. Not in the way that mattered. Grief had already taken Linda, Matthew, and Anna. The flood had taken our home. And now rejection took the last fragile hope I had, that someone might hold out their arms and say, "Come in, Thomas. You're not alone." But I was alone. In those days, loneliness felt heavier than hunger. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but loneliness chewed at my soul. I wandered from town to town, asking for shelter in churches, missions, and shelters. Some welcomed me, some turned me away. Each night was a gamble. Would I find a bed, or would I curl up on cold concrete? I still carried the memory of family dinners, of laughter echoing through our little house, of Linda's warm smile as she passed me a plate. Now I ate off paper plates in soup kitchens surrounded by strangers, heads down, silence heavy. No one spoke of love or belonging. We spoke only of survival. The cold truth followed me everywhere. People didn't see a man who had lost everything. They saw only a failure, a burden, a problem to move along. Police told me to keep it moving. Shopkeepers glared when I lingered too long near their doors. Parents pulled their children close when I shuffled past. I wanted to grab them and shout, I was a father too. I know what it's like to love a child, to hold them close, to protect them with everything in me. But no one wanted to hear my story. And maybe that was the hardest part of all, not just losing my family, but losing my identity. Without them, who was I? Not a husband, not a father, not a homeowner, just a shadow of a man people wished would disappear. Nights grew colder as autumn bled into winter. The shelters filled up quickly, and sometimes I was left outside. I'd huddle under bridges or inside bus stations, wrapping myself in whatever scraps of blankets I could find. The wind cut through every layer, gnawing at my bones. Each shiver reminded me that I didn't belong anywhere anymore. The cold truth was more than just the air against my skin. It was the reality settling into my heart. I had nowhere to go back to. Even if I rebuilt a house, even if I worked my hands raw again, Linda and the kids wouldn't be there. Even if my relatives suddenly opened their doors, the emptiness inside me would remain. One night, sitting outside a diner watching families laugh over steaming plates of food, I finally understood I was no longer part of that world. That world was for people with homes, with love, with something to return to. My world was the sidewalk, the park bench, the shelter cot. The cold truth was that I had been erased from my home, from my family, from the very life I once believed unshakable. But even as the cold wrapped tighter around me, a small part of me refused to let go. I was still Thomas Miller. I had a story even if no one wanted to hear it. I had memories, even if no one wanted to share them. And as long as I carried them, I wasn't completely gone. Still, the truth remained. The flood had taken my house. My relatives had taken away my last hope of family, and the streets were waiting to take the rest of me. There's a moment in every man's fall when he realizes the ground beneath him is gone, that there's no safety net, no place to land, no arms waiting to catch him. For me, that moment came after the doors of family homes closed one by one, after the words, "We can't help you," became the only refrain I heard. That was when it hit me. I had nowhere to belong. I used to think belonging was automatic. You belonged to your family by blood. You belonged to your community by effort. You belonged to your home by the sweat you poured into it. But when the river took my house and the flood swallowed Linda and the kids, those ties frayed, and when my relatives turned me away, they snapped completely. Suddenly, I wasn't Thomas Miller, the husband, the father, the neighbor. I was Thomas Miller, the outsider. I remember walking through town watching people rebuild. Construction trucks rumbled down the streets. Volunteers handed out supplies. Families hugged each other tightly as they hammered new boards into old frames. The smell of fresh lumber filled the air, a scent once tied to hope. But to me, it was a knife twisting in my chest. They had something to return to. I didn't. I tried to stay with a friend once, a man I had worked alongside for years at the construction site. He welcomed me for a few nights, gave me a couch and a hot meal. His wife was polite, but I saw the unease in her eyes. Their children whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. On the fourth night, he pulled me aside. "Tom, you know I care about you, but this can't go on. My family's uncomfortable. You understand, right?" I nodded, though my throat burned. I left before sunrise, carrying nothing but the weight of rejection. As the weeks passed, the places I drifted through grew harsher. I slept in bus stations where security guards shook me awake at dawn, their voices cold. "Move along." I rested under bridges where rats scurried in the shadows. I dozed on park benches until the cold pushed me into wandering again. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold, though both gnawed at me constantly. It was the silence. No one called my name anymore. No one asked how my day had been. No one waited for me to walk through the door. I was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. I carried the teddy bear I had salvaged from the ruins of our home, its fur singed, one button eye missing. It became the only proof that I had once belonged somewhere, that I had once been a father, a man with children who loved him. I kept it tucked in my coat, and sometimes, late at night, I'd press it against my chest and whisper Matthew's and Anna's names. It was foolish, maybe, but it kept me from disappearing completely. One afternoon, I walked past the lot where my house had once stood. The foundation was cracked and broken, weeds pushing through the concrete. It looked less like a home and more like a scar on the land. I stood there for hours, staring, hoping to feel something other than emptiness. But all I felt was the confirmation that I no longer had a place in this world. The community, too, moved on without me. Neighbors who once waved from porches now avoided my eyes. At the grocery store, whispers followed me down the aisle until I couldn't bear to walk inside anymore. I was no longer Thomas who built houses and fixed fences. I was Thomas the homeless, Thomas the failure, Thomas the reminder of how fragile it all really was. People don't like reminders. There's a peculiar tone in being rootless. You start to question everything. Who am I without my family? Who am I without my home? Do I exist at all if no one claims me, if no place anchors me? Each question echoed louder as the nights grew colder. Shelters offered temporary relief, but even there I felt like I didn't belong. Cots lined up side by side, strangers coughing, snoring, muttering in their sleep. I closed my eyes, but I never rested. In the morning, I left before anyone else stirred, ashamed to be counted among them, yet having nowhere else to go. I began to drift beyond the town, into cities where no one knew my name, where anonymity at least shielded me from the shame of recognition. But anonymity is its own prison. People passed me by as if I were a ghost. Some tossed coins into my cup. Others spat near my feet. Most didn't look at me at all. And in their eyes, or their refusal to meet mine, I saw the truth. I didn't belong anywhere. Belonging isn't just about having a roof. It's about being known, being wanted, being needed. Without that, you become invisible. And I had become invisible. I walked streets crowded with families, couples, workers rushing to jobs, and I realized I was outside of all of it. They had somewhere to go. I had only sidewalks and alleys. They had people waiting at home. I had silence. The cold truth from before deepened into something sharper. I was not just homeless. I was rootless, forgotten, without a place in the world. I was nowhere, and nowhere is the loneliest place a man can be. Life on the streets isn't really life, it's survival. Every day becomes about the next meal, the next dry place to rest, the next moment you can escape the cold, even for a few minutes. I had lost my home, my family, and any place to belong. Now I was left with nothing but sidewalks, alleys, and the weight of memory. My mornings began with stiff joints and an aching back from sleeping on benches or concrete. The cold seeped into me at night, no matter how tightly I wrapped myself in scraps of blankets or old coats I found in donation bins. Sometimes I woke shivering so violently I thought my bones might break. Other times, I woke to police officers nudging me with their flashlights, telling me to move along as though I were trash left on the curb. Food was a daily battle. Some days I was lucky enough to find a soup kitchen or a church giving out meals. On those days I ate quickly, grateful for the warmth, though shame sat heavy in my stomach alongside the food. Other days I dug through dumpsters behind restaurants, searching for scraps that hadn't spoiled. I learned which bins to check, which places threw out leftovers in sealed bags, which alleys were safest. Hunger stripped away pride faster than anything else. People's eyes hurt more than the hunger. Some looked right through me, as if I were invisible. Others looked with disgust, wrinkling their noses, pulling their children closer. Once, a man in a suit dropped a coin into my cup without stopping, never breaking stride. To him, I wasn't a man. I was an obstacle, something to step over on his way to lunch. But there were rare sparks of kindness. A woman once handed me a sandwich and said, "Stay warm." A little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve, insisting she give me the apple he was saving. A volunteer at a shelter remembered my name and smiled when she saw me. Those moments didn't erase the pain, but they reminded me I hadn't completely disappeared. The streets had their own community, broken as it was. I met men and women who carried stories as heavy as mine. There was Carl, a veteran who still saluted every time he heard a siren, eyes haunted by battles no one else could see. There was Maria, a mother who lost her children to the foster system when she couldn't keep a roof over their heads. We huddled together in doorways when the wind grew too sharp, shared scraps of food, and swapped stories to remind ourselves we were still human. In their company, I found a strange kind of belonging, not the belonging I had lost with Linda and the kids, but a fragile brotherhood of the forgotten. Still, nights were cruel. Darkness magnified everything, the cold, the hunger, the fear. I lay awake listening for footsteps, always wary of strangers who saw us as targets. More than once, I was shoved aside, my few belongings stolen. Once, I woke to find the teddy bear, the only thing I had left of my children, nearly torn from my arms. I fought like a madman to keep it, screaming until the thief ran. That singed bear wasn't just a toy, it was the last thread tying me to Matthew and Anna. Without it, I feared I'd lose them completely. Health slipped away too. Cuts became infected, coughs lingered for weeks, and exhaustion became permanent. I could feel my body weakening, my strength draining with each passing season. Doctors were out of reach. I was just another homeless man without insurance, without money, without worth in their eyes. Yet even in the darkest moments, I clung to memories. I remembered Linda's laughter in the kitchen, the way she playfully smacked my hand when I stole a piece of pie crust. I remembered Matthew's stubborn determination, his declaration that he would fix everything with his toy hammer. I remembered Anna's giggles as she swung from the old oak tree. Those memories were both my torment and my salvation. They reminded me of everything I had lost, but they also reminded me I had once lived, once loved, once belonged. The streets don't allow much time for reflection. They force you into the present, where to sleep, what to eat, how to stay safe. But in the rare quiet moments, when the city grew still and the stars peeked through, I allowed myself to grieve. I whispered their names into the night, afraid that if I didn't, they'd fade away completely. Life on the streets stripped me bare. It took away comfort, dignity, and even the simple acknowledgement from others that I was human. But it couldn't take the love I carried inside. That love, fragile as it was, kept me alive. And so I walked each day, invisible to most, but still breathing, still surviving, still carrying the weight of memories the flood couldn't wash away. Pain on the streets doesn't always come from the cold or the hunger. Those you get used to in a way. Your body adapts. You learn to layer scraps of clothing, to sleep sitting up so the chill doesn't sink so deep, to swallow food that's stale or spoiled because it's all there is. But the pain of being unseen, that's the one that cuts deepest, and it never heals. I remember sitting on a busy sidewalk one afternoon, a paper cup in front of me, my coat pulled tight against the wind. People streamed past, businessmen with briefcases, mothers with strollers, teenagers laughing into their phones. I was inches away from them, but I might as well have been invisible. Their eyes slid over me like I was part of the pavement. Not one person met my gaze. That kind of invisibility gnaws at you. You start to wonder if you even exist anymore, if maybe you really are just a ghost wandering among the living. I wanted to stand up and scream. I had a family once. I built a home with my own hands. I was a father, a husband, a man who mattered. But I stayed silent because I knew even if I shouted, they wouldn't hear me. Once, a boy no older than 7 hugged at his mother's hand as they walked past. "Mom, why is that man sitting there?" my asked, pointing at me with innocent curiosity. The mother pulled him close, whispering sharply, "Don't look." Her words struck me harder than any insult. "Don't look," as though I was something shameful, something unworthy of a child's eyes. I wasn't a man to her. I was a warning. The pain of being unseen wasn't just from strangers. It was from people who once knew me. Every so often, I'd see an old coworker or a distant relative in the city. Their eyes would widen in shock, then quickly dart away. Some crossed the street to avoid me. Others muttered awkward hellos, pressing a few coins into my hand before hurrying off. No one stopped to really talk. No one asked me to sit with them, to share a meal, to tell them my story. To them, Thomas Miller no longer existed. I was just that homeless man. At night, when the city quieted, the invisible pain grew louder. I lay awake on benches or in alleys, staring at the stars, thinking of Linda's voice, Matthew's laugh, Anna's giggles. They were real once, so real. But now even their faces began to blur in my memory, like photographs left too long in the sun. I clutched the singed teddy bear to my chest, desperate to hold on to something tangible. Without it, I feared even my grief would fade, and then I truly would have nothing left. The shelters offered some comfort, but even there the pain lingered. We were lined up in rows of cots, nameless men and women who once had lives, now reduced to bodies waiting for sunrise. Volunteers smiled and spoke kindly, but it was a kindness tinged with pity. I hated pity. It reminded me of what I had become. Invisible pain is worse than hunger because it eats at your identity. Hunger tells you your stomach is empty. Invisible pain tells you you are empty, that you no longer matter, that you've been erased from the world. Sometimes I tested the world just to see if anyone noticed me. I'd stand at a corner holding a sign, not for money, but just to make eye contact. Most people ignored it. A few glanced quickly before looking away. The sign could have said anything. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I was still invisible. I began to understand that the worst part of homelessness isn't losing a roof, it's losing recognition. When no one looks at you, when no one speaks your name, when no one sees your pain, it's like dying while still breathing. And yet, I kept breathing. Each day I woke, each night I endured, carried by the hope, small, fragile, but still alive, that someday someone might look at me and truly see me again. Until then, I lived with invisible pain, heavier than any hunger, colder than any winter, sharper than any insult. The flood had taken my house. My family had turned away. But it was the world's refusal to see me that cut deepest of all. The mind plays cruel tricks on a man who has nothing left. Mine likes to drift backward, pulling me into the house when I least expect it. I'll be sitting on a park bench, the cold gnawing at my bones, and suddenly I'll hear Linda's laugh in the wind. Or I'll see a boy running down the street with a baseball glove, and for a moment I swear it's Matthew. Anna's giggles come to me sometimes when I pass by a playground, high and sweet, carried on the voices of children who are not mine. Memories come like ghosts, uninvited, unrelenting, impossible to ignore. And though they hurt, I cling to them. They are all I have left. I remember our house by the river, every corner alive with the evidence of our life together. The living room with its mismatched furniture, the coffee table covered in Matthew's toy cars, the wall Anna once decorated with crayons. Linda had scolded her at first, but later she laughed and said we'd keep it because someday we'd want to remember her spirit. That wall is gone now, washed away by the flood, but in my mind, I can still see it, the wild streaks of color bright against the pale paint. I remember Sunday mornings when we'd pack sandwiches and head down to the riverbank. Matthew would always race ahead, shouting that he was going to catch the biggest fish in the Mississippi. Anna trailed after him, determined not to be left behind. Linda and I would follow hand in hand, smiling at their determination. Those afternoons felt endless, the sun warm on our backs, the river sparkling with promise. I remember Linda's pies cooling on the windowsill, the smell of cinnamon filling the kitchen. I used to sneak slices when she wasn't looking, though she always caught me. She'd shake her head, smiling, and say, "Thomas Miller, you'll be the end of me." I told her the same once when she laughed so hard at one of my bad jokes that she dropped a pie on the floor. We ate it anyway, laughing until tears ran down our cheeks. I remember tucking the kids into bed, their eyes heavy with sleep, their little arms wrapping around my neck as they whispered goodnight. Matthew always asked for one more story, and Anna always asked for one more hug. I'd give them both because I believed there would always be another night, another story, another hug. I never thought those moments could end. But the flood taught me otherwise. Sometimes the memories come with a sharp edge. I remember the night of the storm, the roar of the river, the moment Linda's hand slipped from mine in the current. I remember Matthew's cries, Anna's frightened face, the helplessness as the water tore them from me. Those memories are not sweet. They are knives twisting deeper with every replay. But I can't stop them. They are stitched into me as surely as the happier ones. The hardest part is the memories of what could have been. I imagine Matthew as a teenager, taller than me, his voice deepening, his determination stronger. I imagine Anna with her mother's smile, heading off to school dances, her hair tied back with ribbons. I imagine Linda and I growing old together on the porch, watching fireflies while holding hands. These aren't real memories, they're dreams that never came true. But sometimes they feel as vivid as the past. And when I wake from them, the emptiness is worse than ever. People think the homeless are only hungry for food, but we're hungrier for something else. Remembrance. To be remembered, to know that the lives we lost still matter. That's what I crave when I clutch the singed teddy bear to my chest at night. It's not just a toy, it's proof that my children lived, that they were real, that they loved me, and I loved them. I talk to them sometimes when the nights are quiet enough. I whisper to Linda, telling her I'm sorry I couldn't hold on. I tell Matthew I'm proud of him, that he was braver than he knew. I tell Anna that her laughter still echoes in my ears. People passing by might think I'm mad, talking to myself in the dark. But I don't care. Those conversations keep them alive, if only for me. Memories are both my torment and my salvation. They break me every day, but they also remind me I was once whole. They remind me that I had love, laughter, a home. Without them, I would be nothing more than the man people step around on the sidewalk. With them, I am still a husband, still a father, still Thomas Miller. The flood took my home. My family never took me back. But no flood, no rejection, no empty night on the streets can take away the memories. They are all I have left. And so I carry them, heavy as they are, because they are proof that I once belonged somewhere. Proof that I was loved. Proof that I was alive. When you've lost your house, your family, and even your place in the world, you start asking yourself the same question over and over. What remains of me? For a long time, my answer was nothing. I told myself the river had washed it all away. The walls I built, the love I carried, the man I used to be. I believed I was just a shadow walking the streets, a ghost that no one wanted to see. But grief, as crushing as it is, teaches you strange truths. It strips everything bare until all that's left is the core of who you are. And in that emptiness, I began to realize, not everything had been taken. The flood stole my house, but it didn't erase the memories of building it with Linda, board by board, paycheck by paycheck. My family turned me away, but they can't take the moments I held Matthew's hand as he tried to hammer his first nail, or Anna's giggles when she smeared flour across her cheeks, baking with her mother. Those memories live in me, and as long as I breathe, they remain. The streets took my pride, my comfort, my health, but they couldn't take the fact that I once loved deeply and was loved in return. I carry that love inside me still, even if it hurts more often than it heals. I've learned that what remains of me is more than hunger and cold. What remains is resilience. Each day I wake, each night I survive, is proof that the flood didn't finish me. Every breath I take says, I am still here. I've also learned that what remains of me is dignity, even in tatters. People pass by without seeing me, but I know I am more than what they believe. I am not just the homeless man with the teddy bear. I am Thomas Miller. I was a husband. I am a father, even if my children are gone. I am a man who once belonged, and though the world no longer claims me, I still claim myself. Sometimes when the nights are quiet, I sit beneath the stars and imagine Linda beside me, her hand resting in mine. I imagine Matthew laughing, Anna chasing fireflies. I whisper their names so the universe doesn't forget them. In those moments, I feel whole again. Not because I have regained what was lost, but because I refuse to let it vanish entirely. I carry a burned teddy bear everywhere I go. People might see only a ragged toy, but to me, it is proof. Proof that my children lived. Proof that love existed. Proof that the fire, the flood, the rejection, none of it erased the truth of who I was and who I still am. Yes, I am broken. Yes, I am forgotten by most. But I remain. What remains of me is a story of a man who lost everything yet refuses to disappear. I tell it when I can to those who are willing to listen. Some shrug it off, others look at me with pity, but a few, just a few, look me in the eyes and truly see me. And in that moment, I feel human again. The flood took my house. My family never took me back. Life stripped me of almost everything, but it could not take away my memories. It could not take away the love I once gave and received. It could not take away the will to keep walking, even when every step feels heavier than the last. So when you see me on the street, sitting with my head bowed and my hands trembling, know this: I am not just a man who lost a home in a flood. I am not just someone abandoned by his family. I am Thomas Miller. I am the sum of all I have lived, all I have loved, all I have lost. And though the world may never welcome me back, though I may never again sleep under a roof that is mine, I remain. That is what remains of me.